Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're not just looking at a book. We're standing at the foot of a mountain.
That is a very good way to put it.
I was just looking at the physical copy of the text we're covering today, and honestly, the word book feels like a total understatement. It's a monolith.
It is. It's ancient. It's massive.
And it's one of those titles that, everyone in Western history seems to quote, but very few people actually have the stamina to read it. I mean, page 1 to page 1,000 plus.
It's a towering work, for sure. We were talking, of course, about St. Augustine's The City of God. And you're absolutely right about the scale. It's intimidating.
Right.
Because it's not just one thing. It's not just a theological treatise.
No,
It's a philosophy of history, it's a sociology textbook, a political manifesto, and a Bible commentary all kind of rolled into one.
An entire worldview.
Exactly. An entire worldview packed into 22 books.
It's amazing. I've literally seen this book used as a doorstop, and I think that's such a tragedy because the content inside is it's explosive. But to really get why this matters, and we aren't just doing a history lesson here, we have to set the stage.
We have to.
We have to go back to a moment that felt, to the people living through it, like the literal end of the world. The year is 410 AD.
A pivotal year. The psychological impact of 410 AD it's really hard for us to overstate.
I was reading about the atmosphere of that time, and it just sounds terrifying. The Roman Empire, which everyone assumed was eternal, they literally called Rome the eternal city, is suddenly just crumbling.
Yeah.
You have the Visigoths, led by a guy named Alaric, and they're marching down the Italian peninsula. They breach the walls. They sack the city.
And just to paint the picture here, this wasn't just, another military defeat. This was a violation of the entire world order. Rome hadn't been sacked by a foreign enemy in 800 years. For the average Roman citizen, the idea of Rome falling was like, I don't know, like us imagining the sun just deciding not to rise tomorrow. It was an impossibility.
Yeah.
Jerome, the great Bible translator, he was living in a cave in Bethlehem at the time, and he wrote that when he heard the news, he was so stunned he couldn't even speak. He said, the city which had taken the whole world was itself taken.
That is such a haunting line. And so amidst all the smoke and the looting and the refugees fleeing to North Africa where Augustine is, a massive blame game erupts. And this is really where our story starts, right?
Yeah, this is the trigger.
Because the pagan Wilmans, they're looking around at the ruins, at the smashed statues of Jupiter and Mars, and they point the finger directly at the Christians.
They do. And their logic was actually, it was quite consistent with their worldview. For 1,000 years, Rome had worshipped the old gods, Jupiter, Juno, Minerva. And for 1,000 years, Rome had grown and conquered. Then, fairly recently, on the historical timeline, the empire officially shifts to Christianity. The old sacrifices stop, the temples are closed.
And suddenly,
the barbarians are at the gates. The pagans argued, look, we abandoned the gods who built this city to worship this crucified carpenter from Nazareth, and now the old gods have withdrawn their protection. This is a divine punishment for abandoning the pagan pantheon.
And that's a compelling argument if you're a pagan. It's cause and effect. Simple. But meanwhile, you have the Christians on the other side, and they are reeling too.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
If I'm a Christian in 410 AD, I'm thinking, wait a minute. We're worshiping the one true God. We are the righteous ones. Why did he let this happen? Why are righteous Christian women being dragged off by Visigoths right alongside the pagans who worship idols? It was a crisis of faith and a crisis of culture all at once. Precisely.
Yeah.
It was a theological emergency. And into this chaos steps Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo in North Africa. He sees the refugees arriving on the shores, he hears the accusations, he feels the confusion, and he realizes he has to write a response.
A really, really long response.
A very long response. He writes The City of God, not just to defend the Christians against the pagans, so he certainly does that, but maybe more importantly, to comfort the Christians who were just confused and heartbroken.
And that brings us to our specific mission for this deep dive. We have a stack of notes here covering excerpts from, over 10 different books within this massive work. But we aren't just going to summarize it. We want to answer a very specific question for you, the listener, the learner who wants to apply this. The question is this: how can this ancient book, written amidst the ashes of the Roman Empire, inspire Christians today to love Christ more deeply and live more fully for him?
A beautiful goal. Because Augustine doesn't just give a political answer. He doesn't say, here's a 10-point plan to rebuild the Roman Senate.
Yeah.
He offers a radical shift in perspective.
That's the key.
He moves the conversation from panic over earthly instability, walls falling down, economies crashing, to a focus on what he calls two cities. And the hook here, the thing that changes everything, is that these cities aren't defined by geography or borders. They're not on a map.
They're defined by something else.
They're defined by what we love.
I think that is the single insight that unlocks the entire book. It's not about where you live, it's about what you love. So let's unpack this tale of two loves. This is really the heart of the diagnostic he gives us in Book 14.
It is.
Augustine lays out this grand division of all humanity. You have the city of God, the civitas Dei, and the city of man, or the earthly city.
Yes, and we need to be really, really nuanced here. When Augustine talks about the city of God and the city of man, he isn't. He's not pointing to a map.
Right.
A lot of people throughout history have tried to simplify it and say, oh, the church is the city of God and the state is the city of man. But Augustine is much more subtle than that.
So not institutions.
Not institutions. He's talking about spiritual communities, or you could call them mystical cities. And he says these two cities were formed by two loves.
Okay, so let's define those loves, because this acts as a mirror for us today, right? If I want to know where my citizenship lies, I have to look at my affections.
That's it. Augustine writes that the earthly city is formed by the love of self, even to the point of contempt for God.
Amor sui, self-love.
Yes. That is the driving engine of the city of man. It seeks glory from other men. It wants to lift up its own head. It wants to be the center of its own universe.
And the heavenly city.
The heavenly city is the exact opposite. It's formed by the love of God, even to the point of contempt for self. Amor Dei.
That phrase, contempt for self, can be tricky. He doesn't mean self-hatred, does he?
No, not at all. It's more like self-forgetfulness. It's the opposite of being self-obsessed. The heavenly city doesn't seek glory from man. It says to God, "Thou art my glory." It finds its entire identity and its stability in God.
That is such a powerful contrast. Love of self versus love of God. And he goes further, doesn't he? He talks about this lust for domination.
Oh, the libido dominandi.
Yeah.
This is a huge concept for Augustine. He looks at Rome, the actual physical city of Rome, and he says, what built this? And his answer is, it wasn't justice.
Wow.
It was the lust for power. The earthly city is ruled by the lust of ruling. It's about domination, control, pride. But the heavenly city, well, it serves one another in love. It's a complete inversion of values. In the city of God, the leaders are actually the servants.
He grounds this in history, too. In the Bible, I was reading the notes on Genesis, and Augustine does this fascinating psychological profile of the first two brothers, Cain and Abel.
He does. He looks at the very first family drama in the Bible. Cain, he says, represents the earthly city, and Abel represents the heavenly city. And Augustine asks a really simple question. What did they do?
Well, Cain killed his brother.
True, but what did he do after that? The book of Genesis says Cain went out and built a city.
Right. The first city in the Bible was built by a murderer. That's pretty stark realization.
Augustine jumps all over that. He says, why did Cain build a city? Because he was empty. He was driven by self-love and a desperate need for security and permanence here on earth. He wanted to make a name for himself because he had no hope in heaven.
And Abel.
But Abel, the representative of the heavenly city, the Bible says he was a shepherd. He was a wanderer. He built no city.
Why not?
Because he knew he was a pilgrim. Augustine says Abel understood that his true city wasn't here. He was just passing through. He was a sojourner. And that is the fundamental identity of the Christian in Augustine's view, a resident alien.
That is such a key takeaway for our question about living fully for Christ. If we're citizens of the city of God, our posture towards this world should be one of pilgrimage. We're just passing through.
We're intermingled with the world like Jesus' parable of the wheat and the tares growing together, but our roots shouldn't be here. Our citizenship is elsewhere.
And that intermingling is crucial to understand. Augustine says you can't just look at a crowd of people in Rome or, New York or London and instantly tell who belongs to which city just by looking at them.
No way. They are mixed together until the final judgment. You might have someone who looks like a pagan on the outside but is destined for God's city, and you might have someone sitting in a church pew every Sunday who is actually a citizen of the earthly city because, deep down, they're driven by the love of self.
So loving Christ deeply means actively shifting that citizenship in your heart. It means resigning from the lust of ruling, even in small ways in my own life, and applying for citizenship in the city that serves. It's a diagnostic.
It is.
You have to ask yourself, do I love myself to the point of ignoring God, or do I love God to the point of forgetting myself?
Exactly. And that shift isn't just a theoretical idea. It gets tested. in the real world. And that brings us right back to the reality of suffering, because for Augustine's original readers, this wasn't an abstract theology seminar.
No, the Visigoths were literally burning their homes. Right, so let's pivot to that, because the problem of pain is just central to Book 1. The Christians were asking, God, if we're your special people, if we're your city, why didn't you protect us? Why are we suffering? And Augustine gives this famous analogy of the gold and the chaff. I think this is one of the most memorable images in the entire book.
It is. It's unforgettable. Augustine is trying to explain why the same bad event can happen to two different people and have two completely different results. He says, imagine a fire. You throw gold into the fire, and you throw chaff or straw into the same fire.
Same fire.
Same fire, same intensity, same heat.
But the effect is totally different. The chaff just smokes and turns to ash. It's gone.
But the gold glows. It gets liquefied, it gets purified. All the dross, all the impurities get burned away, and the gold becomes brighter and purer. Augustine writes, so the same violence of affliction proves, purges, clarifies the good, but damns, ruins, exterminates the wicked.
That's profound. It's not what you suffer, it's how you suffer. Or, maybe more accurately, the state of the person's suffering determines the outcome.
Exactly. The fire doesn't change, the material changes. Augustine argues that the good man, the citizen of the city of God, is neither uplifted by worldly goods when he has them, nor is he broken by worldly ills when he loses them. If your foundation is solid, the fire just burns off the impurities.
But he gets really specific and honestly pretty tough in Book 1. There's this account of Christians who are being tortured by the barbarians to give up their hidden wealth, their gold. And Augustine takes a really hard line here.
He does.
He basically suggests that if they broke under torture because they wanted to keep their money, they had a spiritual problem.
It's a very hard line, he asks.
Yeah.
Did they lose Christ? No. If they confessed Christ and died, they kept the only thing that actually matters. But regarding the money, Augustine argues that if they preferred to be tortured rather than just giving up the gold, it showed that they loved the gold too much.
Okay, hold on. I want to push back on that a bit because that sounds incredibly harsh. These people are victims of a brutal invasion. They're being tortured, and Augustine is criticizing their attachment to their life savings. I mean, how does he justify that without sounding like a monster?
It does sound harsh to our modern ears, absolutely. But you have to understand Augustine's radical hierarchy of value. He isn't blaming them for being victims. He is using this extreme, horrific situation to teach a lesson about where our ultimate security lies.
Okay.
He says, if you have Christ, you cannot lose your true treasure. The torture was a brutal, horrific test, yes, but it taught a lesson.
Yeah.
They should have set their affections on a possession they could not lose.
So the application for us today, for the learner trying to live fully for Christ, is all about security. It's about what we define as ours. If my happiness and my identity are tied to my bank account or my health or my reputation, I'm incredibly vulnerable.
You're vulnerable. The Visigoths or, a market crash or a cancer diagnosis can take all of that away in a heartbeat.
But if your treasure is Christ,
then you are, in a spiritual sense, invincible. Augustine calls suffering a corrective fatherly discipline. It tests us. It proves whether we love God unmercenarily.
Unmercenarily. That's a word we don't use enough. What does he mean by that?
It's the absolute key to loving Christ deeply. A mercenary works for pay. If you love God because he gives you a nice house, a safe life, and a healthy family, you are a mercenary. You love the gifts, not the giver. Suffering removes the gifts. And then the question remains, do you still love the giver? When all the stuff is taken away, does the love remain? That is what the fire reveals.
That is a very high bar, but I can see how it leads to a kind of freedom. If you aren't loving God for his stuff, you don't have to be terrified of losing the stuff.
Exactly, and this extends even to the ultimate loss, death. Augustine has this almost stoic-sounding view, but it's deeply Christian at its core. He addresses the fear of death that was rampant during the sack of Rome. He basically says, look, no one has ever died who was not destined to die sometime.
That sounds a little cold, but I see the logic. Death is inevitable for everyone.
It is. He says it doesn't matter how it happens, whether it's a fever in your bed or old age or a barbarian sword. What matters is the state of your soul when it happens. This frees the believer from the paralyzing fear of death. If your citizenship is in the heavenly city, death is just the border crossing. It's the moment you finally go home. Exactly. So we've covered the diagnosis of the heart with the two loves and the discipline of the heart through suffering. Now let's talk about the cure. Let's talk about worship. In Book 10, Augustine gets into a pretty serious intellectual brawl with the philosophers of his day, specifically the Neoplatonists and a guy named Porphyry.
We can't skip Porphyry. He was a major intellectual fascist, a disciple of the famous philosopher Plotinus. These Neoplatonists were smart. They weren't, crude pagans worshiping statues. They were sophisticated.
Right. They weren't just bowing to idols.
No. They recognized that humanity had a problem, that we were stuck in the mud of the material world and needed some kind of purification to get back to the divine. So they agreed on the problem. We need to be cleansed. But their solution was... That was weird.
Their solution was theurgy.
Define that for us.
Theurgy literally means God working. It was a whole system of rituals, magic, invocations, all designed to purify the soul. They believed that by performing the right rites, saying the right magical words, or sacrificing the right animals, you could kind of manipulate the divine forces to cleanse you.
It was like hacking the spiritual realm.
That's a great way to put it. Or, for the real intellectuals among them, they thought they could purify themselves just by thinking really, really hard by pure philosophy.
And Augustine, the former master rhetorician, looks at all this and says, no, that's not it.
Right. Augustine argues that God doesn't need our slaughtered animals, our incense, or our magic tricks. He doesn't need our steak dinners, so to speak. He already owns the cattle on 1,000 hills.
So what does he want? If he doesn't want a bull on an altar, what is the true sacrifice?
Augustine does something absolutely brilliant here. He takes the pagan concept of sacrifice and he internalizes it completely. He looks at Romans 12, present your bodies a living sacrifice. He defines true sacrifice as every work which is done that we may be united to God in holy fellowship.
So it's not a thing you do, it's a way you are.
It is. It is mercy. It is broken spirit. It is a soul rising to God in holy love. The sacrifice isn't something outside of us. It is us.
Okay, that makes sense.
But here is the catch, and this is where he absolutely hammers Porphyry and the Platonists. We can't actually purify ourselves. We are too broken. Porphyry was too proud to admit that.
He wanted an intellectual salvation.
An intellectual salvation for the elite. He looked down on the idea that God, the great divine principle, would become a human, get dirty, and die on a cross. That was beneath his philosophy.
That's the stumbling block, isn't it? The humility of the incarnation.
It is, and it always has been. Porphyry wanted a ladder he could climb up to God. Augustine says, no, you need a mediator who came down to you. He presents Christ not just as a great teacher, but as the universal way. Christ is the principle that purifies. He is both the priest offering the sacrifice and the sacrifice itself.
And this is so key for our mission of loving Christ deeply. Augustine is saying that you can't truly love Christ if you're still holding on to your intellectual pride.
Right. To love Christ requires profound humility. It requires admitting, I cannot purify myself through my smarts, my morality, or my rituals. I am part of the mass of sin. I need the mediator.
Porphyry couldn't swallow that pill. He couldn't accept a humble God. And Augustine says that without that humility, you can never truly enter the city of God.
I want to bridge this to how we actually live. Because we've talked about the heart, the suffering, and the worship, but we still have to pay the bills. We still have to go to work. We still live in the earthly city while we wait for the heavenly one. How do we do that? This brings us to Book 19, which I think is one of the most practical parts of the entire work. Book 19 is often considered the masterpiece within the masterpiece, precisely because it deals with sociology and politics and real life. Augustine asks, how does the citizen of the heavenly city live in the earthly city without losing their soul? And he starts with a definition of peace.
Peace is the tranquility of order. That's the famous line.
Tranquillitas ordinis, and it's not just the absence of noise or war, it's when everything is in its right place. The body subject to the soul, the appetite subject to reason, the soul subject to God. He breaks it down into all these layers. The peace of the body, the peace of the household, the peace of the city.
But here's the tension. Christians are citizens of heaven, but they're living in Rome or Babylon, as Augustine often calls the earthly city. Does he tell them to retreat? Should they all, move to the desert and ignore the government?
No, and this is so crucial. There is a strong anti-monastic sentiment here, at least in terms of civic duty. He quotes the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 29, where Jeremiah tells the Jewish exiles in Babylon.
Right, he tells them to build houses and plant gardens.
Exactly. He says, seek the peace of the city, for in its peace you will find your peace.
So we're supposed to be good citizens.
Yes. Augustine argues that Christians should obey earthly laws. We should utilize earthly peace roads, markets, legal systems, safety. We need these things for our survival. If the water supply in Rome is clean, that benefits the Christian just as much as the pagan. So we cooperate. But, and here's a massive but, we do not make these things our end.
This is that distinction between using and enjoying, right? Uti and frui. I found this concept so helpful, but also a little slippery. Can you break it down for us?
It's one of his most famous ethical frameworks. Augustine says we are to use, that's uti, the things of this world, but we are to enjoy, that's fru, only God. Now, enjoy here has a specific technical meaning. It means to rest in something for its own sake, to make it your ultimate source of happiness and identity.
So let's apply that. I have a job. I have a car. I have a house.
You use the job to provide for your family and serve your neighbor. You use the car to get to the job. You use the house as a shelter. You are like a traveler staying at a roadside inn. You are grateful for the bed, the meal, the roof. But you don't start hanging new drapes and renovating the kitchen and acting like you're going to stay there forever.
Because you're just passing through.
You are just passing through. The inn is for use. Home is for enjoyment.
The problem comes when we mix them up. When I try to enjoy the inn, when I try to find my ultimate satisfaction in my identity in my career or my bank account.
Exactly. If you try to enjoy what is meant to be used, you will be miserable. And you will become an idolater. You're putting way too much weight on a structure that can't possibly hold it. And conversely, if you try to use God to get earthly things, like the mercenary we talked about earlier, you are also getting it completely backward. We enjoy God. We use the world.
He also touches on family life here, which I think is really relevant for our listeners. The role of the Christian father or mother in the household.
Yes. In the city of man, ruling is about power. It's about being the boss. In the city of God, even within a household, ruling is a form of service. The Christian leader rules not from a lust for power, but from a duty of mercy. They serve those they command. Augustine says the Christian father is actually the servant of his children because his primary duty is to guide them toward God. That is how you live fully for Christ in your daily life, by turning leadership into service.
I want to zoom out for a second. We're deep in the weeds of the 5th century here, but we can't ignore the fact that this book didn't just stay there. It traveled through time. It fundamentally shaped the people who shaped our modern faith. We need to talk about the Reformation.
Oh, you absolutely cannot understand the Protestant Reformation without understanding Augustine. He is the grandfather of Protestant theology. You have to remember, Martin Luther wasn't just some random priest. He was an Augustinian monk. He belonged to the order of St. Augustine.
So he was steeped in this stuff day in and day out.
Deeply. And what Luther found in Augustine was a remedy for the deep anxiety of his age. In the 16th century, the church had drifted into what theologians call a semi-Pelagian view, basically the idea that if you do your best, God will give you grace.
A treadmill of works.
An exhausting treadmill of works. Luther was tormented, trying to be good enough.
And Augustine had already fought this battle 1,000 years earlier against a monk named Pelagius.
Exactly. Pelagius taught that humans have the free will to choose good or evil without any special divine help. Augustine absolutely crushed that idea. He argued that because of the fall, our will is bound. We are enslaved to sin, to that amor sui, that self-love we talked about. We cannot choose God unless God first chooses us and sovereignly liberates our will.
That is the doctrine of grace, sola gratia.
It is. Luther picked up Augustine's weapon. He read Augustine and realized, wait, I don't have to earn this. In fact, I can't earn this. God does it all. That was the explosion of the Reformation. Now, Augustine viewed justification as transformative. God's grace makes you righteous on the inside. Luther sharpened that to be forensic. God's grace declares you righteous because of Christ's record. But the root idea that we are helpless without sovereign grace is purely Augustinian.
And what about Calvin? He took it even further, right?
Calvin quotes Augustine more than any other church father combined. It's not even close. He adopted Augustine's two cities framework for his view of church and state. But he really leaned into Augustine's view of human nature. Augustine called humanity a massa perditione.
Massive perdition. That sounds incredibly dark.
It sounds dark, but stick with me here. It means that because of Adam's fall, all of humanity is one condemned lump of sin. We are all drowning in the ocean. We all deserve to drown. The astonishing thing is that God, in his mercy, reaches down and pulls anyone out. That is sheer unmerited grace.
I can hear the listener asking, okay, but why does this matter for loving Christ? This sounds depressing.
It's actually the opposite of depressing. It's the death of entitlement. If you think you're a pretty decent person and God is sort of lucky to have you on his team, your love for Christ will be lukewarm, it will be polite. But if you realize, with Augustine and the Reformers, that you were part of that mass of perdition, that you were dead in the water, and God reached down and breathed life into you solely because he loves you. Well, that drives immense, overwhelming gratitude. You love much because you've been forgiven much.
It changes the entire narrative from I improved myself to I was rescued.
Precisely. And that radical reliance on grace is the very heartbeat of the city of God. It's what separates Abel from Cain. Cain thinks he can offer a worthy sacrifice from his own labor. Abel knows he needs the blood of the lamb.
Okay, so let's head to the finish line. We've been through the history, the diagnostic of love, the fire of suffering, the humility of worship, the practice of daily life, and the legacy. Now we go to the very end, books 20 through 22, the end of the story.
The beatific vision.
Augustine talks about the final judgment and the final permanent separation of these two mixed cities. But the part that really captured my imagination is his vision of the new heaven and new earth. And he emphasizes something that I think modern Christians often forget. This isn't just about floating on clouds as disembodied spirits.
No, and he fights so hard for this. The Platonists, Porphyry and his crew, they thought the body was a cage. They thought salvation meant escaping the body forever. Augustine says, no, God made the body. The Word became flesh. The resurrection is physical.
He talks about the spiritual body, but he doesn't mean a ghost.
No, it's a confusing term for us. He means a physical body that is fully powered by and subject to the Spirit. Right now, our bodies fight us. You want to pray, but you're tired. You want to be pure, but your hormones rage. You want to serve, but your back hurts. Augustine says in the resurrection, the flesh will finally be in perfect, effortless harmony with the Spirit. No deformity, no decay, no lust warring against the mind.
He has this beautiful phrase, the body shall be wherever the Spirit wills. It's just total integration.
And speaking of will, this is where we get a huge aha moment regarding the nature of freedom. Augustine distinguishes between the first freedom Adam had and the final freedom we will have in heaven. This is a bit technical, but it's so worth it.
Let's break it down.
Okay. Adam in the garden had the freedom posse non peccar, which means he was able not to sin. He had the capacity to choose right, but obviously he was also able to sin.
Okay, so he was on the fence. He could go either way.
Right. But the final freedom in the city of God is non posse peccare, which means unable to sin.
Unable to sin. Now, to a modern American ear, that sounds like a loss of freedom. If I can't choose wrong, am I really free?
Augustine would say, are you free to flap your arms and fly to the moon? No. Does that limitation bother you? Of course not, because it's not in your nature to fly. Augustine argues that God is perfectly and maximally free, right? But God cannot sin. To be able to sin is actually a weakness, a flaw of the will. It's like a drug addict. The addict is free to take the drug, but he's actually enslaved by the urge. A healthy person is truly free from that urge entirely.
So in the New Jerusalem, we won't just be restrained from sinning. We won't even want to. The desire itself will be gone.
Exactly. We will be so filled with the good, so captivated by the beauty of God, that the very idea of sinning would be as absurd and unappealing as choosing to eat sand when you have a magnificent banquet spread out in front of you. That is true freedom.
That is an incredibly hopeful thought, especially if you're out there listening and you're struggling with a recurring sin right now. The promise isn't just that you'll be forgiven. The promise is that one day the struggle itself will finally end.
The war will be over. Augustine calls this final state the eternal Sabbath.
The seventh day.
Yes. He interprets the seventh day of creation not as a 24-hour time period, but as a state of being. And he has this poetic line that essentially ends the entire massive work. There we shall be still and know that he is God.
Be still.
There's not a passive, boring stillness. It's an active, rapturous attention. He writes, he shall be the end of our desires, who shall be seen without end, loved without cloy, and praised without weariness.
Loved without cloy. That is a stunning phrase. Cloy means to get sick of something because you've had too much of its sweetness.
Exactly. We get bored of everything here. We get bored of our favorite foods, our favorite songs, even our favorite people sometimes, if we're honest. But Augustine says we will never, ever get bored of Christ because he is infinite. Every moment will be a new discovery of his beauty and his goodness.
And that vision, the beatific vision, is the ultimate motivation for loving Christ now. We are, in a sense, practicing for that reality.
Yes. Every time we choose the city of God over the city of man in a small decision, every time we choose service over power, every time we worship in humility, every time we accept suffering with patience, we are rehearsing for eternity. We are acting like citizens of the country we haven't seen yet, but where our citizenship is secure.
So, to recap our mission, We looked at the two loves, the diagnostic of the heart. Are you building for self or for God? We looked at suffering. The fire that purifies the gold and proves we aren't mercenaries. We looked at worship, the humble sacrifice of a broken spirit that relies on the mediator. We looked at our pilgrimage, using the world but enjoying God. And finally, we looked at the vision, the final freedom and the eternal Sabbath.
It's a complete roadmap for the Christian life, written in a time of crisis for a time of crisis.
Before we sign off, I want to leave the listener with one final provocative thought from Augustine that I found in the notes. It's about God's anger.
Yes, this is a profound way to close. Augustine suggests that God's anger isn't just, lightning bolts from heaven. He says this mortal life itself, our ignorance, our struggle, our vanity, the fact that we get sick and grow old and die, this is the anger of God. We're living in the anger that is the result of the fall.
We're living in the wreckage.
We are. But, he says, even in this anger, God does not shut up his tender mercies. He gives us sun and rain. He gives us comfort. He gives us friendship. And ultimately, in the midst of the wreckage, he gives us Christ.
That is the balance. We're in the mess, but the mercy is right here with us in the mess.
Exactly.
So here's the challenge for you, the learner, listening today. Augustine wrote this book while the greatest city on earth was literally burning. People were watching their retirement funds, their safety, and their status turn to ash before their eyes. His challenge to us is this. If you stripped away your earthly city comforts, your safety, your status, your health, your bank account, would you still have a city? Would you still have a king?
Augustine challenges us to build a citizenship that outlasts the sacking of Rome and the inevitable crumbling of our own personal empires.
That is the deep dive on the city of God. If you want to dip your toe into the actual text, please don't be afraid. Maybe start with book 19 on peace or book 22 on the resurrection. But for now, thanks for listening.
Keep seeking the city.